So February's already been a pretty stellar month for gaming as far as I'm concerned, after getting completely lost in games like Helldivers 2, and more recently Pacific Drive, which has been a tremendously good time. There were a range of other games that I grabbed in February, and that's what today's video is all about, are some of the ones that I was most excited to play. And that's probably something I should point out before we jump into the first entry is, normally my process for figuring out what games are going to go on lists like this is really just to look at everything that I grabbed on sale or through humble choice or however I got those games, and then really just take a look at it and figure out which one excites me the most. And this first entry is definitely one that I was very excited to play, and after jumping in, I definitely chose correctly, and that would be Cookie Cutter. So one of the first things that jumped out to me about Cookie Cutter is that it is immediately oozing with like a Scott Pilgrim-y style and charm, but honestly that's not just a skin deep thing either. I mean, it has a whole lot of heart too, just like I guess Scott Pilgrim does as well, and that's evident from the game's menu screen, which might be the coolest look that I've seen since Spider-Man 2 for a protagonist who's just sort of hanging out in their loading screen. Now I will say that this game is a bit of a love story, and I won't spoil too much here except to say that this has one of the most gut-wrenching, unsettling openings that I've seen in any game. And I would have thought that the cartoony style on offer here would have defanged that a little bit, but no, it's pretty horrifying stuff. And I think what really intrigued me about this particular opening was that it's not something entirely new in terms of the inciting incident or anything like that, but the animation, voice work, and direction here are just incredibly well done, and it made me super uncomfortable. So yeah, again, not a game for kids by any stretch. Now moving on, the game is effectively a revenge tale of sorts, but also one of rediscovery. Also, the opening is just so well done here because the tutorial that informs you how to play flows effortlessly into the adventure proper, and I was just kind of blown away by the animation, voice acting, and like, seriously, I don't understand how this game didn't just set the world on fire when it dropped back in December. Like, I'm really surprised it only has like 300 or 400 reviews on Steam right now. Even just moving around the environment and interacting with the elements within it is a joy just because there's so much more dialogue on offer here than I was expecting, and a lot of it's fully voice acted. But moving away from just the presentation, the combat too is pretty sublime. Dodging feels right, parries feel right, quick-stepping backwards out of harm's way feels great, and in all of this chaos of perfectly implemented movement, you essentially get to wail on your opponent with a Street Fighter's finesse, including air juggles before ending them with a fatality as many times as you'd like. Oh, and something else I love is that when you do perform those finishing moves, I love that it shows a 9,999 damage number that is just such a deliciously video gamey number. And as much as I enjoyed the combat, the platforming felt really solid too, and a lot of the level design just oozes with secrets galore, and it's just shockingly detailed everywhere you look. And after that opening section, it immediately puts you to a choice: will you journey east or west? And that's all it gives you. There's no description of what lies east or west or anything like that. You just choose where you're going to exit the relative safety of the diner that you're in, and the only friend you've ever known up to this point, to east or west. I went west. Now there were a couple of things that I did not love about Cookie Cutter, one of which is in the opening tutorial level where I reached a section where you have to basically super jump straight up to get to the next area, and I actually ended up having to look this up, and apparently other people had trouble with this as well, where there was no clear indicator that you needed to crouch down and then jump up, so I guess I wasn't the only one, but still I think that could have been better communicated. Also, the load times did feel a little bit excessive. Like, it was the first time I really questioned, like, should I have put this game on the SSD instead of the SD card, because typically I don't see that big of a difference once the game's actually fired up, but you know, maybe I'm missing something here, but it did seem like there were a fairly large amount of load times, so they took a little bit longer than I would have expected for a 2D Metroidvania. But those minor complaints aside, the action stayed fast and fluid on the Steam Deck. It's a very colorful game, so I would assume if you have the OLED that it's going to look really great on there. But yeah, all this is to say that Cookie Cutter is a tremendously fun Metroidvania so far, and I can't wait to spend more time with this one. Essentially, they just have an iron grip on what made the mechanics of the original Metroidvania formula so great, just with a modern coat of paint put over it. So yeah, if you're looking for a very stylized Metroidvania, you should check out Cookie Cutter. And speaking of retro, this next one is a game I think we can all agree is retro, even though it feels kind of weird to say that considering it did just come out, I believe, back around 2012, and that would be The Darkness 2. And here's the thing, I didn't even realize that this was a game I could get on Steam. I was so excited when I randomly saw this on sale one day because, well, one, sales are just great, and two, I didn't even know that this version of the game was on PC, and I hadn't thought about this game in years. And sadly, the original never got a PC release, which is just criminal, but hey, maybe in a few years, like Night Dive Studios or somebody will bring this back to life or something, but such as it is a very fun video gamey game. And another reason I was super excited to play is because I played and beat the original Darkness on the 360 just years ago, and I never got around to playing the second one, so this is actually one of those rare occasions where I've got an older title that I get to experience for the very first time that I have no experience with on its original platform of release. The basic premise, and I'm definitely taking some liberties here, is that in the original there is a Mafioso hitman who gets possessed and ultimately becomes an anti-hero of sorts on a quest for vengeance. So yeah, at its core it is a supernatural mafia action game, and that just sounds awesome. Granted, it also sounds like something Chris Moltisanti's production company would have come up with, but still. If you love games that revel in being themselves, then The Darkness is definitely something you should check out. And if you don't feel like tracking down or emulating the original game, there is a helpful recap video which is actually narrated in a really fun way at the beginning, so if you just want to jump right into the sequel or just need a refresher on what went down in the original, they've got you covered. And after a bombastic start, predictably Jackie reindulges the darkness within and goes to work hunting down the mafiosos who try to take him out early on. And the thing that really grabbed me after that first opening sequence was the lightly cel-shaded graphics. If I remember correctly, the original Darkness was not a cel-shaded game, so it was kind of surprising for me to kind of see it with this visual style in the sequel, although considering it is based off of a comic book, I think that probably makes sense. Don't get me wrong, it's still way over the top with blood and gore, and it all looks super stylized and great, but if you're somebody who's not typically into cel-shaded games, that might be a bit of a surprise for you. Combat's pretty straightforward in so much as you have guns and demonic powers that manifest through the darkness inhabiting Jackie's body. And it is twisted good fun watching a bunch of goons run in terror as you start impaling them with rebar, shredding them with mid-air executions, or ripping their guns away just to chase them down as the otherworldly hitman that you are. As you progress, you'll start to unlock a variety of grisly darkness talents across 4 different trees that will bump up your flexibility in terms of firearms and darkness efficiency. But even with all of your beefed up combat abilities, it can still put up a pretty stiff challenge, and considering it's called the Darkness and all, environmentally speaking, you have to be cognizant of any nearby light sources and extinguish them to put yourself at maximum combat effectiveness. Because obviously, as somebody who is fueled by the darkness, it does not make sense for you to hang out in the light, so yeah, it is pretty great fun taking out the lights and basically terrifying everybody that you're tracking down. And not to be reductive here, but it really is just a big, dumb, loud, hyper-violent romp that probably slots comfortably into hidden gem territory. So if you've never played it before, and even if you haven't played the original, I still think you can comfortably have a pretty good time with this one, especially if you can find it on sale for like $5, it's a no-brainer. And as an older title on the Steam Deck, it runs butter smooth even at max settings. The only real caveat for its compatibility is that sometimes it shows keyboard and mouse controls rather than controller glyphs on screen. Hardly a deal breaker, and again, if you're somebody who likes to see genres fused together and have a soft spot for organized crime and otherworldly shenanigans, you should probably give it a whirl because, again, just great video gamey fun here from The Darkness 2. And next up, thanks to Humble Choice, moving away from 3D action-oriented horror games and firmly into the realm of action-oriented sci-fi games is Destroy All Humans 2 Reprobed. And speaking of Humble Choice, before we jump into talking about Destroy All Humans 2, they're not like a sponsor, or I'm not affiliated with them in any way or anything like that, but I will say they've really had a lot of good stuff lately in their Humble Choice selections. And this past month, they actually had a couple of games I'd already played and really enjoyed, Scorn, and then also the other one was Beacon Pines, both of which really fun games. I don't need them because they're already in my library, so I'll throw them on screen somewhere around here, I'm sure. So if you would like that game, by all means, go ahead and grab it, but now I'm going to go ahead and get back to Destroy All Humans 2. So much like The Darkness 2, Destroy All Humans 2 also starts with a recap of the events from the first one, and in this one, you will be playing as Crypto-138 instead of 137, for reasons that you will understand if you watch the recap, or if you play the original, this is all going to be old hat to you. But ultimately, it has that same over-the-top humor and style as the original, and I absolutely love this. Now, right out of the gate, by default, the visuals are set to low for the Steam Deck when you fire it up, and that mostly does keep it 60 FPS, and it doesn't really detract from it in any significant way. I think mostly because of the fact that it is a very cartoonish presentation overall. Seriously, every character model in this game just looks so cartoonishly exaggerated that it kind of seems like a more juvenile Pixar flick or something like that. But hey, that's part of the charm, right? Crypto's childish humor and predilection towards our Earth women is completely hilarious. And while the humor might not land with everybody, I am glad that the devs saw fit to keep this remaster completely intact like the original was. And they actually threw in a fun disclaimer at the beginning about how its humor might be too much for modern minds, but thankfully I am not a sophisticated man, so it hits all the right notes for me. On the gameplay front, it feels as fast and fluid as ever, and in no time at all you'll be jetpacking your way through the skies, zapping KGB agents, and tossing your foes around with your mind powers. Well, that or starting a dance party with free love, or body-snatching random cops. It's schlocky, over-the-top, third-person action fun, and while I only fairly recently revisited the original Destroy All Humans, everything here does feel just a little bit better. Performance feels more solid on the deck overall, levels are more interesting, and the interface design and navigation just feels tighter as a general rule. And again, deck performance in particular seemed like it did a lot better at higher settings than the original, but maybe that's just my imagination. Either way, I think it's totally playable on higher settings if you don't mind dropping to 30 or 40 FPS, but at low settings it still looks pretty great if you want an experience that's closer to 60 frames frames per second. Now, I haven't beaten Destroy All Humans 2 yet, so I'm really excited to dive into this one, probably as the weather warms up, I guess, but yeah, all that is to say, I'm not sure if the story usurps the original, but everything else I've seen so far feels like this is a demonstrable improvement. So if you love the sci-fi adventures of Crypto in the original, you're probably going to love what's on offer here as well. And since we're on the retro train, let's just go ahead and keep it going with a game that is over 20 years old, but this is a remastered version of it, and it's a game that I have not played in about 20 years, and this is my first time revisiting it again, and that would be the Final Fantasy X HD Remaster, which obviously probably a pretty good time to check out Final Fantasy games anyways, considering we do, well, at this point by the time this video goes out, we will already have Final Fantasy VII Rebirth in hand. And again, I haven't played this game since like 2001 or 2002, so what, almost 25 years ago at this point, which is a really weird thing for me to say out loud. But I will say that I was immediately hit by just like this wave of nostalgia firing it up. Well, after I got past the loading screen anyways, or that initial launcher screen where you have to, select what language. By the way, I think that defaults to Japanese, so make sure you set that to English because I did not and had to restart the game. Also, it is kind of a bummer that launcher screen does not support controller input, so, be ready to, use those touchpads or a keyboard and mouse if you've got one to go ahead and proceed. But those minor upfront complaints aside, I really love the look of this version of Final Fantasy X. I think there have been about 5 or 6 different versions of this game, and each has its own visual quirks, but this one seemed to suit me just fine. Also, I was really surprised that this game seems to only run at 30 FPS and appears to be locked there, but honestly, it didn't really detract from my enjoyment of the game or anything. It was just kind of a weird thing to see when I'm so used to seeing games somewhere in that 40 to 60 range for most of the stuff I play on deck. As far as the gameplay itself, it's just as fun as I remember, and it was really great seeing these characters that I hadn't thought about in a very long time. But it also seemed appropriate to grab this month because Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was just around the corner, and now that it's here, my hype for that game definitely influenced my purchasing decision here. But that's the thing though, even though I haven't beaten a ton of Final Fantasy games, I recognize how special that series is, and whenever I do have the occasion to stick one out to the very end, it's always been a good, if not a great time. So I don't mind having an easily accessible way to get back into the world of Final Fantasy X, and while I didn't take the time to fire up Final Fantasy X-2 yet, that's intriguing to me as well. And here's hoping that one day maybe I'll just get super motivated to knock out 10 and 10-2, hopefully before the third entry of the Final Fantasy VII Remake comes out, and who knows, maybe one day Final Fantasy X will get that remake treatment too. And finally, the last entry on this list is one that was recommended not once, not twice, but by 3 different people on 3 different viewer suggestion videos, so I finally took the leap on it, and that would be Huntdown, which was recommended by Fethica, Carlos, and the Fried Industry. And again, because I read every single suggestion that ever gets dropped in the comments section, I had that on my wish list, got it for a pretty decent deal, and just went to town on it because, wow, that is a really fun game. And if you're somebody who has a fondness for side-scrolling arcade action with a combination of Double Dragon and NES's RoboCop, I suspect you will probably like Huntdown as well. It's a future dystopian noir setting, which I sure do see a lot of games in the indie space take on this aesthetic, and I'd say I've even seen a lot of them do it better than Huntdown does, but Huntdown excels in what it sets out to do, even if it's not putting forth any crazy new premise or anything. If you've ever played a game like Gunsmoke, or to some degree even Wild Guns, or enjoyed any kind of side-scrolling beat-em-up, you're probably going to enjoy your time with Huntdown. You have 3 different characters to choose from when you start, and initially you'll have a gun with infinite ammo, you can pick up secondary guns that have a limited ammo, and then also you can find grenades in the environment and a whole bunch of melee weapons as well. And it's not bogged down with a skill tree or any sort of RPG elements or anything like that. It just goes really hard on foundational arcade shoot/beat-em-up mechanics and lets that speak for itself. Different enemy types are a joy to dispatch, and every new boss I encountered had progressively more challenging patterns to recognize, and I got wrecked by some of these bosses. Thankfully, Huntdown also throws you back into the action immediately and has a liberal amount of checkpoints in its story mode. And speaking of what is ostensibly an 8-bit throwback, there's a lot of voice acting here, and while your character's quips might get on your nerves a little bit, I found the whole thing to be a super engaging and entertaining romp, and it was a whole lot of fun to just think back on some of my earliest gaming memories playing games like Lethal Enforcer, RoboCop, or Elevator Action, or really any of those 90s action arcade romps that were probably in the arcade of your local mall or multiplex. Deck performance was rock solid, although I did have a weird issue where I was in dock mode and I had to change the order of my controllers to get it to recognize properly. It could have been a one-off, but if you play in dock mode predominantly, it might be something to keep in mind. But yeah, if you're just a big fan of that retro-style difficulty with a lot of fun pattern recognition, then Huntdown should definitely be checked out, especially if you can get it for the criminally low like $3 or $4 that I got it for. Don't get me wrong, I think it's absolutely worth the $20 asking price, but man, I just couldn't believe that I didn't jump on this one sooner, so again, for all of you who recommended this game, thank you so much. I am really glad that I have it in my library now. Alright, and that's it for this one. Again, not every game that I grabbed in February, just some of the ones that I thought would be most exciting to put on display in a video, and had a lot of fun with myself. So, what about you? Did you grab anything great in February? If so, let me know what they are in the comments below. As always, thanks so much for your time, take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.